again, let's welcome Stephen Lang.
So what did you think? It holds up pretty good. Oh gosh. And I do think the CinemaScope is really pretty amazing. That's the work of Jack Hildyard, who was Lean's cinematographer. Of course, when they were scouting this, they went to Burma, to the Kwai, which was not really the Kwai, but where it actually happened. And the banks were sandy, and it was a completely uncinematic location, very boring. So Hildyard said to David Lean, "Come with me." And they got in a plane and they flew to Ceylon. And that's how he said, "This is what the River Kwai should look like." And so that's why they filmed it there. Just waiting for Jonathan here. I will speak to Jonathan for a little while, and then happy to open it up if you have any questions, which not necessarily that I can answer at all. I think primarily I am a great fan of this film, and so it was a great pleasure to see it on the big screen after all this time. Now, what's interesting, of course, is Jonathan Foreman, who will be joining us as a veteran journalist. He has covered world events from Bombay to Baghdad and from London to New York for The New Yorker, The National Review, the London Daily Telegraph, and he has earned esteem and many awards along the way. But perhaps more pertinent to today's proceedings. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Stephen. Sorry about that.
I'm just, will he be up there? Marissa, is he going to be? There he is.
Oh, great.
Wonderful. I'm just introducing you, and what's quite pertinent to today's proceedings is that Jonathan did do a 5-year stint as the chief film critic for the New York Post. And so just on that level, I want to examine him. But perhaps even more pertinent today is the fact that Jonathan Foreman is the son of Carl Foreman, the belatedly Oscar-winning screenwriter and blacklisted screenwriter of Bridge on the River Kwai. That's a whole story, and I hope we can examine that just a bit as well. So we have a few things to discuss, and I'd only like to add that Jonathan is the elder brother of our own esteemed friend and neighbor, Amanda Foreman, and it was Amanda who introduced Jonathan and I, so I feel that I'm in her debt for that. In any case, Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think I want to start out by asking you, when did you last see this film, Bridge on the River Kwai?
Well, I last saw it properly probably 25 or 30 years ago. However, when I knew I was going to be doing this, I thought I better go and reacquaint myself in case there's stuff I've forgotten. So I have. I watched it on sadly not on a big screen like you've just seen it, and I'd love to see it on a big screen. I'm not sure I've ever seen it on a proper big screen.
Yes, the last time I saw it, as I told our guests, was 1964 when I was 12 years old. So it's a pleasure to see it again on the big screen, and perhaps there'll be another screening at some point. You can see it that way. That's the way it really is intended.
I mean, to see a CinemaScope movie, to see it like that, it makes such a difference. And it means the close-ups are so powerful. And the scene like that, the one I remember is the scene where the birds are coming over, after they first kill the Japanese soldiers. Yeah. That kind of stuff is amazing on a big screen, I imagine.
It really is. And Lean, of course, he cut his teeth for a number of years as an editor. And he edited his own film. And the editing in this film the pacing of this film is really so suspensefully brilliant in my estimation. In any case, he takes his time. He takes all the time he feels he wants to take to tell this story. There are just a profusion of jungle shots of moving through, whether they're stalking the Japanese or whether they're floating down the river to set the charges. And what's one of the things that I find so interesting about it is not the very first shot, but maybe the third shot of this film is the train that's kind of barreling. And that train, in my mind, for the entire duration of this film, is just coming. It's coming and it's coming. And I just think that that's movie making at its really smartest, because it appeals to you on a subliminal level rather than just being completely aware of it. But as a film critic, Jonathan, can you give me your estimation of this film? This film was branded a classic the moment that it opened, the first day it premiered, and has remained that ever since. Does it merit that title still?
I think it does, and I think it also holds up. I mean, it's fascinating, I think, to see it. When we're so used to modern movies, I mean, as you just pointed out, he takes his time, but it's not slow. I mean, that's the strange thing about it. There are no sort of longeurs in it. Each scene takes its moment, but it's so well paced that it's never slow. It's what is it? How long is it? 2 hours and
40 minutes.
2 hours and 40 minutes. And that's quite common nowadays, except we really feel it. You know what I mean? When you see it in many modern movies. And this movie takes its time and it develops the characters, and there's a lot of characters in it. And yet it somehow works and it's gripping all the way. So, I mean, yes, I do think it's a classic. I mean, there are things that now seem, I mean, I suppose, I suppose now we might think, I'm trying to think, what aspects of it seem odd now to a modern taste? Well, I mean, it's one of the scenes my father didn't write and didn't like, which is the scene with the first scene with William Holden on the beach with the nurse, and some of the other stuff, some of the sort of sexual stuff with the girls. It feels a little, not hokey exactly, but slightly forced. Like, we've got to have some good looking women in this film, so we're going to figure out some way of doing it.
Well, not only do you have to have good looking women in this film, you have to have a good looking white woman in this film, and that was the dictum that came down from Harry Cohn, who was the head of Columbia Pictures, who was pissed off that there wasn't. And so Lean, in terms of that scene you're referring to on the beach, Lean did not like that scene one bit. He didn't want to shoot it. And I actually love that scene for a number of reasons, but the big reason is that what this film really represents to me is an absolutely successful marriage between Hollywood studio filmmaking and the British film school of that time, which was kind of Ealing Studios. And of course, Lean had done all his directing work for Ealing Studios. This is the first of his epics, the first of his 5 epics. The films he made prior to this were much smaller films, and they were all in black and white. So this is an extraordinary achievement in my view.
And they're very character focused. Those original, you watch Brief Encounter, which is a masterpiece, and it's beautiful. And you do say that, so he's just expanding. But yes, I think you're right, and you've captured something else, which I think is really important about it, which is, and I think in terms, we'll talk about my father's screenplay and what's in it and what wasn't, but it all kind of comes together. Do you mean everyone had their view of what should be in and what shouldn't be in? Lean didn't want to do this, and my father didn't like aspects of the ending, didn't want to have that scene with Anne Sears on the beach. But actually, it all kind of works. It's a bit like Casablanca in that way. A lot of people put stuff into this movie and didn't like the stuff that other people did, but actually, it kind of all works and makes it better.
Yeah, I completely agree, and of course, if you want to Hollywoodify a film, there is no better way to do it in the 1950s than to put Bill Holden in it. I call him Bill, though I've never met him, but he's been one of my favorite movie stars for my entire life. Nobody plays kind of the cynical, satiric, kind of jaundiced view with a good heart in the end, as well as William Holden does. And it's significant that Holden, of course, is in first position over the title in this film.
Well, yes, and it's one of the interesting, that's exactly a very good point. As of course, the original book, by Pierre Boulle, doesn't have an American character in it. It doesn't even have the Commando raid in it, and quite the same way. And it's so they had to, but you had to have an American movie star, otherwise it's just a small British movie and no one would have watched it. They wouldn't have the money to make it. So,
Right.
but it works, and Holden does have this kind of. He's kind of amazing because he's not. It's actors like him. There aren't very many of them. I mean, actually, yourself might be one of the exceptions to this. But there's a kind of, there's no one like him today. And it's a sort of he's good looking, but in that very 50s sort of very masculine way, very quite sort of gritty looking, quite sort of yeah. I mean, it's a different. He's not pretty. Do you know what I mean? And at all. And
Sorry.
So I was going to say, I think he's a sort of, and you think of him, with all those other actors of the period, but he's brilliant at playing cynical characters, and I think for the post-war generation that was very important. I mean, everyone who's watching it had been in through the war, basically, and so I think that makes a difference too.
This film never could have been made during the war,
no.
But it could be made 10 years after the war. About Holden, one other interesting thing about it. He spends at least 70% of this film with his shirt off.
He does. I noticed that actually. I kept thinking, like, you're in pretty good shape, for sort of.
That's why they wanted it that way, and he also had to shave his chest for it, by the way, because Holden was actually kind of hairy and everything, and they didn't want that. They wanted a nice, smooth American. So to me, this combination of David Lean and Jack Hildyard and Jack Hawkins, the quintessential, he was just such a fine journeyman actor himself, I think, Hawkins.
Yeah.
And of course, Guinness, who was not the first choice for the role. I believe the first choice was Charles Lawton.
Yeah.
Who could not have done it. He was in terrible shape. He was way overweight, but he was Lean's first choice, but they wouldn't insure him, so it's just as well. He took Guinness reluctantly into this film, and he let him know that. Also, Lean had a very, very cantankerous relationship with Guinness, although they worked very successfully before this, and they would work very successfully after this as well.
I remember hearing a story that supposedly, Guinness gets off the plane and arrives in Ceylon, Sri Lanka, Ceylon as it then was. And the very first thing that Lean says to him, says, "You weren't my first choice, it was sharp." Which is classics of David Lean. I mean, David Lean fell out with just about everyone. You know what I mean? It's
just such a shitty thing to say to somebody who's
Yeah.
not to go to work for you. It seems to me.
In our household, David Lean didn't exactly come across as a not a nice man. Bit of it. I mean, the word very English, you'd say he's a bit of a shit. People.
Well, it's very interesting. Just to kind of put a footnote onto the Lean and Guinness thing was. The scene that happens the evening before they open the bridge, where where Guinness is philosophizing on the bridge, talking about it's been 28 years in the army, and you wonder if you've accomplished anything like that. That entire speech, which is kind of a monologue, although Saito was there listening, is filmed from the rear, and Guinness is working very hard to move his head to the left, so at least he can be shot in profile. And then, as if to add insult to injury, Lean puts the camera directly on Saito, who's not saying a word, who's just listening. And then he goes back to Guinness in a profile shot, but we never see a close up of Guinness doing the speech that I'm sure he worked on the night before, and wanted to get it absolutely perfectly. And he does. He delivers it so beautifully and so simple, it seems to me. So anyway, so much for them. I want to then just to also bring up Sam Spiegel, because Sam Spiegel was the guy who made this all possible. He was the producer on this film. And Sam Spiegel, in many ways, respects, if you read about Spiegel, will remind you of Harvey Weinstein on a number of levels, some of them not particularly pleasant. levels also. But he also was a bit of an Anglophile, and he was the producer who could bring Columbia Pictures and Britain together and to actually get this film made, because that's what he did. He lived in England for long periods of time. And he was, back in the day, he was trained by the producer Doris Sherry, and he was one of the producers who really produced, as opposed to a lot of what happens in the world today, where everybody seems to be a producer. He was a producer, and I believe that Spiegel was friends with your father. Is that?
Yes, and they knew each other in London, and there was a whole thing going on. My father had been blacklisted. He was in London writing things under pseudonyms and including stuff with David Lean, actually, but and secretly. But Columbia really, he worked with Columbia before, and Columbia was sort of really wanted to work with him, and with Sam Spiegel. My father had bought had optioned the novel when it came out, and I guess they were part of the same sort of circle in London of sort of American exiles. I mean, Spiegel obviously wasn't blacklisted, but Spiegel was able to put it all together. But Columbia wanted to make movies in Europe, and Columbia also wanted the blacklist to end if it could. I mean, to some degree. I mean, well, not to end. They wanted to be able to use. Well, they wanted to be able to use people like my father, kind of thing, and they were willing to push things a little further. I mean, ideally, they would have liked him to, had another hearing and name some names, but they were willing to bend the rules a little more than the other studios were.
Now, perhaps you can shed some light on the share of the writing in this, because although you see at the end of the film, or at the beginning of the film, the credits, we did see Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson credited as screenwriters in this. When we saw the film in 1964, that credit would not have been on the screen because they were both blacklisted writers. When Carl Foreman was released himself from the film, perhaps you can talk about that, he recommended as his replacement Michael Wilson, who was another expatriated blacklisted writer. So Foreman leaving the picture had nothing to do with the blacklist, because the guy who replaced him was also a blacklisted writer. However, when you were all witness to the elegance, really the elegance of the writing in this script, and of course it did receive the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. However, the guys who wrote it were not there to receive it and did not get a nomination for it. But who did?
No, that's the extraordinary thing. So they said, screenplay by Pierre Boulle, who is the French novelist, who also, by the way, did Planet of the Apes, but who not only didn't write the script, but couldn't have written the script because he didn't speak English. And it was a really extraordinary thing. So, the best script wins Best Adapted Screenplay, and the screenplay goes to Pierre Boulle, whose name was on the print, and it's an extraordinary thing to do. That showed how the blacklist was still going. So the two writers who actually did it, aren't mentioned, and that stays that way. It stays on them. They're not credited for the 30 years. I mean, that's the amazing thing. It's never changed, and it only changes in 1984 and 85. So Wilson was dead. My father was dying, and there was a petition to the Academy to fix it. A film historian called John Weaver did the research, found all the original scripts, and put this petition in. And then in 1985, there was a little ceremony with my mother was there, and Mike Wilson's was there, and I was there, where they said, "Oh, we've made a mistake. We're sorry. Here are the Oscars here's an Oscar with the right name on it."
I've heard the story that your father was alerted to the fact that he was going to receive the Oscar the day before he died. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. I mean, it was sort of whispered into his ear. I don't know how much he sort of smiled. I mean, my mother told him, and he sort of smiled. He was very ill. I mean, but it said he did finally, and it happened at the end. But you think, great. So, and it was actually awarded posthumously. But he did know, and he knew the process was happening. I
love that, though, the fact that he smiled, because it could have been that, look, the Academy, 34 years before screwed him, and then they told him, and he dropped dead after that.
Yes. Exactly. He wasn't holding on for that.
Academy for you.
Yeah, he wasn't holding on for that. But it is an extraordinary thing that it took them so long, and that they'd gone along with this, untruth for such a long time. And also from Boule's part, you think, who accepts an Oscar for work they didn't do?
A Frenchman.
And it's like they used to say, it's like it's
I-
really something. And Spiegel went along with it at the time, and Lean went along with it at the time. It wasn't their
Well,
finest
Lee was
hour.
pissed off too because he felt he should have gotten a writing credit as well.
Yes, he did, and it's very interesting. He was my father always used to say that David, there's, I mean, you can argue about stuff between, and look, these things are always contested. Everyone in any script that has multiple people on it, everyone always says that theirs was the most important contribution. But and Lean was a bit of a frustrated writer in some ways. My father always used to say that, and he felt he should, he'd certainly felt that. But if you do look, and I have seen some of the early drafts, that you can see, that it's. I don't think Lean really did deserve that. He's, and I'm not a believer in the auteur theory.
Well, best director, you should, be an actor.
Yeah, he contributed so much, and but who contributed what? A lot of people contributed a lot of things, but those were the two writers who really did it. And I think, and you get. It's an interesting film because it's watching. That's the other thing that struck me when I watched it again is how funny it is. In parts, you know what I mean? There are these, it's got that dry humor, and it's got that sort of, and you realize all these people who wrote, my father was a veteran, Wilson was a veteran, and all this stuff. There's an element of that veteran's humor, sardonic stuff about the army and that kind of thing. Absolutely. One of the conflicts, though, that's kind of interesting is that between Wilson and Foreman and David Lean is that my father used to always point out that David Lean was quite anti-American, didn't like Americans, old-fashioned Brit in that way. So had a slightly snooty attitude towards it. And but of course, on the other hand, Pierre Boulle and possibly my father and Michael Wilson at the time were probably not that pro-British either. And that plays into the sort of the way that Colonel Nicholson is conceived and portrayed. And I think Lean didn't really like that much, that much. And certainly I don't think Guinness did. The sort of that old-fashioned British, he's a professional officer of the old army, the pre-democratic army. Hence his obsession, of course, with the idea that the officers shouldn't have to do any manual labor.
What I'll just touch on another thing, which was that you mentioned how many people contribute to this film. I had the great good fortune about 3 days ago to have an extended conversation with Jeffrey Horn, and Jeffrey Horn is Lieutenant Joyce. He was 22 years old when he made that film. He's 91 years old now. He's been a member of the Actors Studio for 70 years. And I said, Jeffrey, we'll send a car. Would you come on up to the screening? And he said, no, because on any particular day, I'm not sure what works. So, but he was delighted that the screening's happening and sends his regards. And he told me, he said that, well, everybody did contribute to this film, as Jonathan points out, but the real hero of this film was a man named Jack Fowley. And Jack Fowley was the prop master. And very famously, the day they were going to blow the bridge, they had 6 cameras set up in 3 different places. They had all these Ceylonese diplomats and heads of countries come to see the blowing up the bridge and everything, and they had it all cued out so that when the cameraman gave the signal, it's a go. And one of the cameramen, an older cameraman, Freddie something, he forgot to give the signal, and so it was aborted. But they couldn't stop the train. The train went over the bridge, plunged into the river, destroyed a bunch of equipment, and destroyed part of the train. And this is a catastrophe. And Jack Fowley, prop master, put a gang together in pure Colonel Nicholson fashion. And they hauled that train out of the river. They got it back up on the tracks. And the next day, they blew the damn thing up. So Jack Fowley is the unsung hero, according to Jeffrey Horn, of Bridge on the River Kwai. Jonathan, could we speak about the Blacklist a little bit? Did your dad, did he speak about it with you? What was it like for you growing up with Carl Foreman as your father?
That's a big question, but I've written about it a little bit. But it was no, he did. He talks about it a lot. It was this thing that had changed his life. There he had been in the late 40s and early 50s, making all these like socially conscious movies. Marlon Brando's first movie, The Men, and
The men.
Kirk Douglas and The Champion, and then finally High Noon. Doing all these movies, it's extraordinarily successful. You've had the struggle to make it in Hollywood for decades. The war and the army changed things. Things are finally coming together, and then suddenly the blacklist comes along, and it's all over. You know what I mean? It's like it's sort of, and he had to leave the country. He was willing. He admitted he'd been a member of the Communist Party, which he had been, for years throughout the 30s and all the rest of it, and into the 40s, and but was willing to admit that and say it was wrong, but he wasn't going to name anyone else's name, even someone who'd already been named, and that was that. And people didn't want to know you, and he went to England, and he went before the committee twice, but it was a huge shock, and it did sort of hang over his life. Yes, he was very fortunate. He had a second career in England, starting with Kwai, although his name wasn't on it, but then he made a film called The Key with William Holden again, and then a whole lot of movies. He had a second career, Guns of Navarone, and all these other movies that came after that. So he had a second career, second life in England, and it went very well, but it was always overshadowed by this thing. I mean, he used to think it was so weird that he had, English children who sound like me. Instead of the American kids, he got divorced while he was in England. That wasn't intended. You know what I mean? And so it was sort of there, and he was always angry. I mean, he wasn't angry about it, and he was angry with people who'd named names. Not everyone, because some people had pressure on them. They had families to support, and it was too much. But people who didn't have to, Elia Kazan, people like that, he couldn't really forgive. So it was always there. But his politics was so interesting because he'd left the party, and I remember. He was an old left person, not a new left person. What does that mean? And I remember him telling me things about, for instance, he probably joined marches against the Vietnam War, but for someone of his generation who'd been in, World War II and all the rest of it, when Jane Fonda goes to Vietnam and poses on a machine gun of the anti-aircraft gun of the North, that's wrong. Do you know what I mean? It's like that's a step for him. That no, you can't, because he saw himself. He always kept his American citizenship, so he always saw himself as a patriotic American. You know what I mean? He loved Britain, and more. I think when he made Bridge Over Kwai, he was seeing more of the less attractive sides of the old-fashioned British character. But that changed. He made a movie called Young Winston, which is a sort of love letter to Britain. But he was, he always, for him, in his mind, he was a patriotic American, and it was. I think that's a sort of. So it was. He was disappointed by what had happened, but it didn't make him turn against his country.
He had, I believe, he had aspirations to be a director as well.
Yes, he'd always wanted to direct his movies, and he always tried to be a producer as a screenwriter, so he could protect his screenplays. He directed one film. He did a lot of second unit stuff called The Victors. Mm-hmm. Which came out of Columbia in 1963. It was a follow-up to Guns of Navarone. It was a very anti-war film, and has an amazing cast of European actors and actresses, Melina Mercouri and Romy Schneider and people like that. It's a great movie, very hard to find. It was a sort of anti-war cult film of its time, but he directed that, and that's the only movie he directed.
Let me ask you, Jonathan, is Bridge on the River Kwai an anti-war movie?
I think it is. I think there's very strong elements of it. I mean, it's very cynical about war. It's about the madness of war. I mean, he hated the lines at the end. They added madness, because he said, like, you don't realize after
3 times off.
Yeah, he says, if you haven't realized after 2.5 hours that it's mad, you need to think it's but it's a madness on both sides. The crazy British stuff. I mean, one thing I noticed in this, I don't know if you noticed it. There's a when Nicholson's already crazily. Arguing with the doctor, like, well, of course we've got to do this job. And he goes, are you sure we're not, aiding the enemy? And he goes, what on earth is wrong with you? And then he says, one day this war is going to be over. And of course, that's the line that Colonel Kilgore uses in Apocalypse Now. In a crazy scene. It's like, missing it almost. One day this war, for someone like, one day this war is going to be over. And you think, like, yes, good. And everyone else who's a non-professional soldier is hoping for it to be over. But I think I think it is a very strongly anti-war. It's not anti-war in the sense of saying we shouldn't fight the Japanese, or the Japanese, and I think Saito's character is fascinating. I mean, one thing's my father, I was very careful in the way he wrote Colonel Saito. And one of the reasons was, and it's not racist thing in the way you might expect for a film of that time. Because during the war, when he was in the Frank Capra film unit, one of the projects he did with a novelist, Irving Wallace, and Dr. Seuss, his name was Ted Geisel, was to make an educational movie for the US Army called Know Your Enemy, Japan. And they spent months and months researching Japanese culture and all that sort of stuff. And part of the idea was to make people realize that the stereotypes of the Japanese as being these sort of, buck-toothed and sort of feeble and weak were obviously ridiculous. You know what I mean? Well, as you'd expect from people who'd conquered half of Asia. Do you know what I mean? Obviously they weren't. And so I think there was a sort of, an understanding of the culture of imperial Japan at the time. But no, but I do think it's an anti-war film. I think it's cynical. It's about craziness on both sides, but of course it's layered, it's rich. I mean, that's one of the things I think that makes it so interesting to watch now as a movie, is that it's and the way you would find it very rare in a movie. It's complex. It's a complicated film. It's about character. It's about action. It's got adventure in it, but it's got a lot more going on. And I think that's one of the things that's so lovely about it, is its richness.
Well, the intimate relationship between Nicholson and Saito, which again comes to non-fruition on the bridge.
Yes.
In that day, it's a very, very intimate relationship they have. Actually the music that they have there is quite romantic and everything. It's a strange thing. You kind of feel that these guys, could be, maybe should be friends, but of course that's
and they're both obsessives, and they're both prideful in their in a British. My father used to say, well, they're both island races. The British and the Japanese do have weird connections and closeness. The Japanese very historically very pro-British, but one of the interesting things about that, of course, in the movie is you see as Nicholson, after he comes out of the box, and he gets stronger and stronger, and as he's doing stuff, he's winning in a weird way, and Saito's losing. Yeah. Even as the mission he wants is getting done, he's more and more humiliated. He almost sort of physically shrinks as the bridge gets built, and you just think that's so. It's just a weird.
Well, after all the humiliations that Saito, which he brings on himself, but that he suffers at the table. Do you think we might have some tea? Do you think we can have dinner while we're doing this?
Yeah.
I have already given the order. I mean, he's just completely shot. And then the next time you see Saito, what is he doing? He's on his bed, sobbing and crying. Yeah. It's just so, it's not tragic, but it's very, very pathetic, I think.
Isn't it? And it's very strange. And some of the stuff that Nicholson says, it's not entirely crazy. I mean, the stuff about the morale of the men is very important, and the discipline. I mean, it's true. It's missing the wood for the trees it's missing the bigger picture entirely, but it's not crazy. I mean, not entirely crazy, isn't it? I mean, there's a sort of internal logic to it all. It's like, it's very important there. Men are much happier when they're working and doing a project and all that sort of thing. Like, well, yes, but,
I think it's what it is. It's that heart of oak mentality that is wonderfully British, and it's one of the things that we admire about the British. Yes. But it also is their downfall in the sense here is that, I mean, I would say for Nicholson, if you wanted an epithet, it would probably be pride goeth before a fall, because that's British. Because remember that scene where the guy says, by the way, Colonel, there are trees in the forest that held up London Bridge for 600 years, and you can just see Nicholson kind of, just thinking about posterity.
He says 600 years. He actually says it, doesn't he? You think, oh God, you're really missing the point on this one. But and we'll show them. We'll show them how good a bridge, and all that sort of thing. You think, like, this is
just so deluded, but so kind of deliciously deluded.
Yes, I mean, tragically deluded and all the rest of it. Here's an interesting question I've got for you: is what do you feel about that final scene? You know what I mean? Which has always been controversial. The falling accidentally, deliberately onto the plunger. Which my father didn't like it and always thought it should be darker and bleaker. But actually, I think it kind of works. This kind of and blasting and vigorous way. When he sort of seems to realize his folly.
What have I done? He says, "What have I done?" Yeah, and so he does. He has, it took a while, but he found it.
But what does he mean by what have I done? Does he mean, he's killed his own people, he's done all this sort of stuff, or does he mean, what does he mean? What have you wonder about?
Probably all of the above,
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
think.
I love the ambiguity of it, though. I love that I think it works really well. But
yeah, and I think my favorite moment, well, I have a lot of moments I love, but when Holden leaps out and yells, "Kill him! Kill him!" He's speaking for all of us.
yes,
Can't tell you how often I've wanted to use that as a meme lately, also.
yes, yes, yeah.
Whatever. I wonder. I don't know. Jonathan, is there, maybe we'll take a few questions for Jonathan from the house. I see a hand up over there.
If Jonathan understands how much of the film is his father's voice and how much of it was Michael Wilson's voice.
Well, we kind of touched on that, but did you get that question, Jonathan?
I didn't hear it. No.
How much of the film, what percentage of the film is your father's, and what percentage of it is Michael Wilson's, is the question.
Well, my father always said that what Mike, besides putting in some of the dialogue at the end and the scene with Anne Sears on the beach, that it was more of a polish. I haven't seen myself the completed scripts. There's a lot of stuff in there that I do sort of recollect, and things that remind me of other work that my father did. I mean, there's some similar things in The Guns of Navarone, in some of the discussions you get in that movie between David Niven and Gregory Peck.
Yeah. That's an interesting film, actually, to compare to Kwai. For one thing, Carl Foreman wrote both of them, and he produced a Navarone. But Navarone, which comes about, it was made probably around 6 years after this film.
Yeah.
It's an altogether simpler film. It's a very good movie. It's a really good war movie, but it's kind of a caper movie in a way.
Compared to this, it is. But it still has these discussions. You've got this rivalry between the American and the British, the David, and discussions about leadership and behavior that are in there. I mean, compared to a modern action movie, it was an action adventure movie, but it's got this stuff in there about, sort of what are we doing and what are you supposed to do? It's a pure commando raid movie compared to this one, but there's some of the same sort of themes are still in there. And I think also some of the stuff with William Holden's cynicism. I mean, there's bits that you don't approve, but there's some of it feels.
Well, the cynicism in Navarone comes from the British side, because it's David Niven who is really the sarcastic one in that film. And I don't think that Gregory Peck was a fine actor, but I'm not sure he was capable of sarcasm at all. It's not something he did. But it to me, this is Kwai is a classic great film for the reasons for the size of the film, the epic nature of the film, and the intimacy of the film, the strength of the characterizations, the writing, the gorgeous cinematography. And Navarone is a damn good war movie.
Yeah, no, they're not. I wouldn't compare them in that way. There's an amazing richness to this film, and you have these different and very funny, dry dialogue, appalled stuff in it. There's so much in this film, and it's very moving in lots of different ways. I mean, it's very moving when the men cheer the release of Colonel Nicholson, even though he's the guy that's going to work them to death and drag people out of the hospital. The scene in the hospital, I love that scene where he goes in to pull people out. He's already got his own officers working to pull them in. Yeah. This sort of thing. And then when the doctor says, well, have you asked Colonel Sato to have some of his men help too if we're so different? No, we can't possibly do that. That would this idea that it's a game. The idea that war is a bit of a game, really, and it's all a bit of a game. And we've got to be good chaps and this sort of stuff, and be sporting and all this stuff. And it's like, no, you're in the middle of the world. Well, this is the Second World War. People are being worked. Their slaves being worked to death. 13,000 people are worked to death on that railway in real life.
13,000 POWs died doing it, and over 100,000 Laotians and others died, civilians. doing it.
One thing I quite liked, which I'd forgotten, is in the beginning movie, when you see the guys working on the railroad, they're really skinny. Which is, and sometimes in those old war movies, you don't get that. No, and in real life, they would have been even skinnier. You see photographs, but you get a sense, no, these are half-starved people this is happening to. And it's kind of
Well, that's one of the points that does get made about this film, because actually the fellas who worked on the real bridge on the River Kwai, upon which this is based, some of them took great issue.
Yes.
And their commander, the Nicholson role, was a guy named Tusi, I believe, and he was nothing like this. They were all sabotage was the order of the day, whatever they could do to slow everything down.
Yeah.
Nicholson is a wonderful creation. Interestingly, when people talk about this movie, invariably they say, it's a really good movie, Bridge Over the River Kwai, to which one says, well, actually the name of the film is Bridge on the River Kwai. However, the name of the book by Boole is Bridge Over the River Kwai. So there you go, just another little irrelevant factoid that crowds into my brain.
And the real bridge. I actually went to the real River Kwai in Thailand, and it's it's nothing like this. This is all shot in Ceylon. It's quite a small little river, and there was a bridge that was easily bombed by the Allies eventually. So that's all created. I mean, it's the truth of it, I guess, is this huge railway of great military significance. That is true, which makes Nicholson's things even crazier. But it's and yes, some of the people who suffered on the railway were upset about the film in that sense, because but the film wasn't trying to show, it's not about the real Burma Railway in that sense. Set in the Burma Railway, but it's not supposed to be the real one.
I actually have been to the location in what is now Sri Lanka. I've been to where they shot it. Been up to the Lavinia Hotel where they shot the botanical garden stuff and everything, and been right where they blew the bridge. It was very, very marvelous and kind of a moving thing for me there, because I really do have a lot of feeling for this film. Let's see. Do we have any other questions out there? Here's one right here.
I have a microphone.
Oh, thanks. Did you mention that Carl Foreman was exited the project at some point?
Yes.
And could you speak a little bit about that?
Exiting the project?
Did you say during the course of the production he?
Well, I think Jonathan, so just to recapitulate, that Foreman wrote it. Lean was not entirely satisfied with it. I don't know whether Columbia was or not, but he ended up leaving the project and recommending Michael Wilson to come in and do I think that what Jonathan is saying is that what Wilson did was essentially a draft, a streaming, a fix kind of a thing.
It's an interesting question and a good one, and it's hard to figure out exactly what happened or the timing. I've got photographs of him going out to Ceylon and paddling down the river with David Lean. They fell out. They didn't get on. They didn't get on very well. But he also had to. I mean, it's what the actual thing of leaving the movie. He had to leave. They were, doing rewrites when they were there. He had to leave and go to the US to do this second hearing with the committee. So he had to go to America anyway. When he reckoned Michael Wilson. So that played as much a role, I think, as not them falling out. Eventually David Lean also fell out with Michael Wilson, of course, as well.
I mean, a remarkable writer Carl Foreman was. I don't know when the last time we've seen High Noon, but it's a pretty amazing film as well.
Could you share any specifics about the collaborative relationship between David Lean and your father? Any sort of anecdotal information about how they spoke with each other, or how they developed the material together, or anything like that?
He'd written the script, I think, a first draft of the script before Lean came on. They were looking, that sort of, and there was. And as I said, my father used to always say he had that feeling of David Lean not being a fan of Americans and Americans like him, basically. And it was a prickly relationship, I think. I mean, they got on okay during the thing. So I don't know enough about that sort of thing. And certainly they didn't remain friends at all after the film. Unlike, my father was a friend of William Holden's, he did another film with him, and of Jack Hawkins, that sort of thing. But that he and Lean didn't get on. They never sort of got on, and nor did Mike Wilson.
I want to call on Chris Gibson now.
Hey, thanks so much, Jonathan. I'm curious to know if your father ever mentioned that he was influenced by the American experience in Korea. This is in between, and the reason is, we had, it was sad, this chapter, but our prisoners in Korea really struggled. Some turned on each other, some collaborated with the enemy. There was an investigation that took place, and in 1953 and 54, the government took action. They actually published the Code of Conduct, the official Code of Conduct, which made it clear that your duty is to resist. And if resist means with regard to labor, that as long as it's not aiding the war effort or humiliating, that enlisted men may work, non-commissioned officers may supervise as officers are not to be required to work. But the other piece of this was to stay true to each other and to not collaborate. And as I watched the interplay between Nicholson and Clifford, this all turns on your definition, on your perspective on loyalty, duty, and honor. Nicholson thinks he's got the right perspective. Clifford, ironically, not the professional soldier, questions it. And I'm just curious if any of that was that on your father's mind? He seems like he was really tracking on events. He's a veteran himself. I wonder had he might been influenced at all by that tension.
That is such an interesting question. I think it's a sort of, and I don't know the answer to it. I wish I did. It would have been in the air. It's a sort of that is such an interesting question because you wonder about that, all the stuff. Because, of course, yes, the Manchurian Candidate stuff, but also collaboration. And it came up, of course, in the Second World War as well, to a certain amount. The British, of course, were always escaping from trying to escape from German and Italian prisoner of war camps, and you had a duty. You were supposed to try and escape, and they weren't supposed to shoot you if you did, although they did. So I don't know. It's a very interesting question. But he was always writing about issues of loyalty and man against the society and what's expected. You see it in High Noon. It's in lots of his movies. And what should your loyalty, to whom should your loyalty be? It came up once, very interestingly. I was a schoolboy and I was reading a lot of E.M. Forster, and I read, there's a famous quote by E.M. Forster, the novelist, where he said, and it was in the same time as the Kim Philby and the other British traitors in British intelligence in MI5. And the quote from E.M. Forster was, "If I'm ever called on to choose between my friends and my country, I hope I would have the courage to choose my friends." And I read that. I was probably 15 or 16, and I remember thinking, God, isn't that great? And I came to my father, who was, then in his 60s, and I said, isn't that great? Thinking that he would be like, yeah, that's quite right. And he looked at me like I was insane. He said, what are you talking about? It's disgusting. It's disgraceful. You can't, to betray the millions of strangers who are your fellow countrymen is the most terrible thing. And I was so shocked by it, and I suddenly thought, okay, so loyalty, so his idea of loyalty very much was not your friends, not yourself. It was, there is a service of the greater good that you're supposed to.
I appreciate that. As somebody who served as a soldier for 29 years, I really appreciated how this was written, because sometimes there aren't definitive answers. There's just this tension, there's these choices, it's moral, ethical domain. And I think it teases it out, and there's some ironies in it as well. For what it's worth, of course, the conventional wisdom now is with the Code of Conduct. But as you pointed out earlier in your remarks, that it is still a question. It's because he had good intent, but then as Stephen mentioned, the hubris gets in. Once he gets on a roll, all of a sudden, his perspective on the morale of the troops, you start to question: is this really about that, or might it be something else? And then, of course, Clifford brings up, I think, the first order question.
what he does too, and this happens throughout High Noon, is he rationalizes his own behavior. And throughout High Noon, you have all these different characters who refuse to come to Will Kane's aid, rationalizing their behavior. So that's something.
Yeah, and there are always these arguments which are, to some extent, on their face, legitimate. Do you know what I mean? And maybe he should just get on his horse and leave town. Maybe they're not worth it. And it is true. The morale of the men building this bridge might make a difference between them surviving and too. I mean, it's not. It's these things aren't. They're not simple questions.
And that's brilliant. Sorry, go.
Yeah, and it's treating the audience as well as with respect, because these are not simple questions. Do you know what I mean? It's that they're really not, and I think it's and that's great. It's adult filmmaking in that way, isn't it? There's sort of these
Yeah. One of the it is adult filmmaking, but I loved it when I was 12, and that's because of the adventure aspect of which it's never, because it's a grand adventure as well. But one of the things that Nicholson says, which is just such a genius piece of writing, so I think your dad did it, was when he says, he looks at Clifton and he says, tell me this, if you were operating on Saito,
Yes.
would you try to save his life or not? And there's nothing Clifton can say about it. And it really, Nicholson really captures something there very concisely and very brilliantly. I want to bring up just a couple of other things. One thing that bothered me that I've never noticed before was when the radio, when they're on the radio, when they're getting the radio transmission, they get information that they kind of have to have in order for the plot to go forward. But I wonder who the hell told who that the location of the bridge moved 400 yards downstream. Where did they get that information?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Figure it out, and I always think I'd have to think about it, and maybe I can't think of any way, because one of the things that they do is set up by Saito very early. He says, "We have no barbed wire here. We don't need it. You're in the center of the world here. There's no place to go." They really sell the notion of this being a place where you can't get to and you can't get away from. And yet somebody's got the information about moving the bridge.
I assumed, and again, that they just sort of, a plane had flown over it from somewhere. But the idea that they do make it, I think one of there's a lovely shorthand way where they show how hard it is to get away. His escape is so difficult. And I like the fact that even after he's been taken in the village and they put him in the boat, he makes the mistake, and there's no dialogue of drinking the river water and then immediately get sick. And it's just shown, and I thought that was really good. The other thing about the radio scene that's so cool is he kicks the radio. It's Tokyo, the Tokyo propaganda radio, and one of the things she says is, go slowly, don't volunteer. This whole thing about volunteering is like, so even she says that, and it's a nice bit of irony there, because he's.
There are two moments that I think probably wouldn't have happened had Lean not seen the African Queen. And the first one is finally when Holden is in the boat, he's got dysentery, and then there's a wide shot where you see where whatever river he is on comes into the sea. And he's there. It's very much an echo of the shot of Hepburn and of the African Queen when it finally makes water in Lake to get to Louisa. It's a dead ringer in a way, that shot. And the other thing, of course, is the leeches, where he's peeling leeches off, because nobody peels leeches better than Humphrey Bogart in African Queen. Well, I hate leeches. And of course, Bogart was the first choice to play the Holden role in this. Yeah. Didn't do it. And interestingly enough, not to get too granular, Holden and Bogart disliked Holden tremendously. For one reason, he was younger and handsome. So even Bogey had his kind of rotten ways. In any case, I think we have time for another question. Another question?
Yeah, thank you for coming and sharing what you've shared, Jonathan. I'm curious why your dad optioned the book and what Peter Buell's reaction was to the film?
I don't know what the action was to the film. What I do know from something my father said and also wrote about was, they after he optioned the book and then Sam Spiegel, then bought the rights. They were looking at it, and I've actually got a notes on it somewhere here. They He comes over, yeah. So Pierre Boulle then came to London, my father's suggestion, and they were worried about changing the ending of the book because of French law and moral right and that sort of thing. So they thought they should bring him over, and it was a very it was a very difficult conversation because my father didn't speak French and Pierre Boulle didn't speak English, and they wanted, and they said, how would you feel about blowing up the bridge? And he said, oh, it'd be great to blow up the bridge because it doesn't happen in the book. I just couldn't figure out how to do that. So he was, at that point, pretty cool with the idea of them vetting in the commando raid and all that stuff. So he sort of, he gave it the blessing, and my father used to say he had this autographed copy of the book from Pierre Boulle. So at that point, they all sort of got on fine. Obviously, afterwards things are different when, once Pierre Boulle has gone and accepted an Oscar for a screenplay he didn't write. I don't think it was at that point. I don't think they had any other contact really.
Is there any other ground, Jonathan, that we haven't kind of touched on, at least that you'd like to speak about?
Well, I guess what are the other things that I thought? I mean, you've touched on almost everything. I suppose the other thing is it's a sort of, things that when I was watching it, it was, as I say, I think it still works. I think it still feels very contemporary. I was struck when I was looking in the scenes, when they're in the hotel and it's Jack Hawkins and William Holden and the others, is how, with the exception actually of Jeff Horn, no one looks boyish. Do you know what I mean? It's a sort of thing. And actors, they did look different in those days. Do you know what I mean? It's a sort of, everyone's looks, sort of adult. No one, it doesn't look like, sort of Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. You can't really imagine them doing it. Although I do think if this movie were to be remade, I can actually imagine Tom Cruise in that William Holden role, weirdly enough, in a sort of, if you were going to do it again, because of that thinks of, playing the shirker who then gets stuck having to do something.
If it were being made today, of course, the Japanese would be treated far differently than they are. If one would take a beef with this film, it's, if you think about it, the Japanese, and Saito is in his own category, but all the Japanese are basically portrayed as incompetent, bumbling, and bribe takers. It's sort of epitomized in a way by, remember when the guard walks out and stands under the pouring rain, rather than maybe moving 8 inches to the right or left or something. It's sort of, it's a little foolish, I think.
I thought he went into the pouring rain because that Saito has said something. So it's like he's coming out. He has to stand in the right position, even if it means being completely soaked. I think the other thing, you're right about that. The Japanese being, and of course, the Japanese weren't yet an economic superpower. But the other thing, of course, is that in fact, and this is something to do with films of the 50s, is it plays down the actual violence and cruelty. I mean, no one gets beheaded, and in real life, they were. Right. I mean, it's sort of, it's a kind of, and have their, cut to pieces and tortured and all that stuff, which nowadays
now they probably would put that in, the beheading and all that. That's what makes it a Hollywood movie. That's what makes it sort of glorious, because we should never really forget that one of the most vital components to cinema is the escapist quality of it. Why we come to the movies. We don't come to get, a lot of times, to get the hard truths. We get to go on a ride, on a journey, and this movie certainly does take you on one. I think we'll take one more question for Jonathan, and then we're gonna call it a day. Back there. Yeah.
Quick question. Saito's sword, in Japanese tradition, the sword is supposed to be facing down. And when the blade is faced out, it means disrespect to enemies. Was that done on purpose? Do you have any idea?
The sword is actually going behind him.
Yeah. But
Yeah, when you have it in front of you, then it is, you bow it the other way. I don't know, I don't know what it's about, but, one assumes that, the actor, Cecil Hayakawa, understood that and did, it's a choice that he made.
Yes, and they also had Japanese official military advisor on the set, as well as a British military advisor on the set. So it would have been conscious. And as you say, Sesui Hayakawa, who is such an extraordinary, I mean, that's another thing we haven't had a chance to talk about. What a great actor he was. I mean, he really does. And of course, he'd been a Hollywood heartthrob before the war, which is an amazing thing. You could be that, and he was.
Well, he had a huge career in the silent films. He was a big star in the silent movies. I mean, yeah, I'm getting the axe here. So I think I'd like to give a great round of applause to Jonathan for joining us.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Really,
It's been such a pleasure. I just wish I could have been there with you and kind of thing. It does feel very weird. I know I'm up on a big screen. It makes me think I should have had a facial before I kind of did. I feel like one of those old movie stars. What a pleasure. Yeah, but I'd love to have seen them. I envy you all for getting a chance to watch this. And Stephen, I'm a huge fan of yours, by the way. And your knowledge of this movie is extraordinary.
It's mostly anecdotal, but I thank you very much. You are more than the maraschino cherry on this wonderful Sunday that we've spent together. So thank you all for coming. I know there are going to be many more great films that are going to be streamed as part of 100 Years of Cinema. I hope that sometime down the line, I'll have another opportunity and maybe we'll do Treasure in the Sierra Madre. Who knows? Thank you all. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.